up, Grandpa! Wake up!
You just collapsed in your armchair, and then the Friends theme comes on. I'll be there for you.
Yeah.
You jump awake.
So glad that software has finally caught up with the game. Yeah.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Starting a bit late.
But we're also inside, so it's fine.
We are also inside because it's so it's smoky out there. Any spot we choose has the danger of being smoked out.
I heard there was a pyrocumulus cloud outside.
Not that we haven't potted in the smokier conditions than everyone else.
Oh yeah, no. That was like July 20... No. It was like August 2020, I want to say.
Yes, the smokiest of the smokies.
Yeah.
And
the day that Officer Smokey rolled up
yeah.
and asked us to put out our cigarette on the smokiest day of the year, sitting in a desolate quarantine park as ash rained from the sky. I'll never forget that morning. I like to think that Officer Smokey won't forget it either, but probably for different reasons.
I hope he fucking knew he had to retire that day. Comes home, reflects on what he did, realizes he needs to fucking quit.
Smoking or doing that?
Quit being a cop.
Okay, gotcha.
Like, the height of ridiculousness of what he was doing, like, it put all three of us in, like, Alice in Wonderland for a second.
I wonder is there, like, a patch you can buy that, like, helps, like, satisfy your need to, like, be a petty tyrant? Because if they ever came up with that, man, you probably need a prescription for it, honestly, though. That's the problem.
Oh, God. Where does the need to be a petty tyrant come from? I guess that's a dissatisfaction with your life. That's anger. That's powerlessness.
Yeah, that's what that is.
It's a sense of powerlessness to change the circumstances of your life.
Yeah, it's a kind of like sort of...
So, Coke.
Coke?
Yeah, cocaine is the remedy for a sense of powerlessness.
Is that what cocaine does?
I don't know. I've never done it.
Yeah, but that makes sense.
It makes you feel big and powerful and invincible.
Just
woo! Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can be
for a moment.
You can be a real gentleman for a few hours before going back. Yeah, no,
it's the prime distinguishing factor of a cokehead.
You can be real generous for a moment, because for a moment, yeah, you didn't need to prove anything.
Something I romanticize intensely is drawing rooms. Like, whenever I'm reading a book from the 30s or in the 20s or like the 1850s and they go into the drawing room, like, I love picturing that. Like, wood paneled walls. Yeah. Bookshelves. Yeah. That are filled with books.
No, I know of the aesthetic of which you speak.
Do you have any attachment to the idea of these drawing rooms?
I like to think that is where I will dwell as an old man in some capacity.
In a drawing room?
Or just like, yeah, I want to have like one of those old lamps that's like brass and like a warm tobacco pipe and like various encyclopedic volumes about important yet obscure topics and like, perhaps like a dog and like, I don't know. Just,
that's a nice ambiance.
Kind of just like
a big stoic dog.
Just like laying down
by your feet.
Exactly. And maybe it's raining outside. Maybe there's, a pot of warm coffee or something. I don't know. It's a kind of coziness. I think that I know like the Danish have like a word for this. Actually, I don't know what it is. I think it's like. I want to say like helig or something like that. I'm not sure.
It's this intellectual awakeness. I associate it so strongly with the salon.
Yeah, what is it? Isn't a drawing room a salon, basically? What's the difference between a drawing room and because my mind went to salon when you brought that up.
I don't know. We use the word salon to be an event, not a physical room.
Oh, it's weird. I always thought of it as a room.
But like Jade's salon happened in the living room of the old house, just the same as it happens in the living room of the new house.
Yeah.
I guess if we have drawing rooms these days in middle class, it's called a den.
Yeah, it's like a room.
Not a drawing room.
Or
like, if you have something more than a living room, it's probably called a den.
You know what's the disgusting 2021 analog of this?
Uh-oh. I don't know if I even want to know.
Think you can handle this right now? Because it's okay. It's like the Zoom home office space. That's what that is.
Fucking all white walls and
exactly.
all
and like,
fucking clean and
yeah,
like one tasteful plant
exactly.
in your frame.
An engineered, minimalist,
yes,
sublimely inoffensive reality.
Yes. And
yeah.
Scrubbed clean cannot possibly be offensive to anyone.
Except, yeah. No, that's true. The drawing room, I think the richness and the kind of fact that it is filled and yet not like chaotic. It's like cluttered yet organized.
Well, it's at its worst when it's cluttered and cramped.
Well, cluttered I don't think implies disorganization because a bookshelf itself is almost like the image of clutter, although like the organized kind.
It's organized. It's like clutter is each object is a different shape. And,
okay, maybe.
And has to like take up more space than its actual physicality because it doesn't fit with the other shapes around it. So it's this object next to that object next to that object. It's clutter.
Right.
Like this bookshelf, I wouldn't say cluttered about this bookshelf.
Oh, that's the way I was using the word cluttered. We'll have to use a different word.
Like,
what would you call that then?
Okay, see the top? There's the moths in a moth case and the coyote knickknack. If there were 5 more knickknacks on there, then that would be cluttered.
If there was like a Dr. Pepper cup or something sitting there, it would fuck it up.
That would add to the clutter and turn it towards messy besides.
Yeah, okay, all right, messy. Yeah, messy's like it's like an orthogonal direction. Yeah.
But with a drawing room, how far do you take it with your fondness of drawing rooms? Would you want a drawing room in your house with ventilation but no windows?
No.
It'd have to have windows.
100%.
Because that seems like an even more ultimate drawing room in my imagination.
No windows?
To have no windows.
Would it be like underground?
It could be, but no. Like first floor.
Yeah.
But no windows, wood panel,
yeah.
Dark wood paneled walls.
Like a retreat kind of thing. A place where you can go and do your craft that's not going to be... where you don't have the necessity of entertaining guests or something like that.
Or a
place of respect for your work.
Or a salon type thing, like the people in there are trusted confidants and you can joust intellectually with each other without fear of social repercussion. Because it's cloistered.
So you put it on YouTube and then there's fear of social repercussion. But that's a modern problem, isn't it? Can you imagine back in the day, all the people who were making podcasts in like 1600, 1700 never got published because they couldn't record it, but that must have been some cool conversations.
I don't know, actually. Do you even have those conversations if you know they'll never get heard?
Oh yeah, I think so. Of course.
I don't know.
Because you and I are having conversations before I believe they would ever be heard. So.
And that did make those conversations possible. You're right. But then would they have stopped after a certain point if we hadn't put some kind of productive fire under it?
Probably. Yeah.
I mean, that's why we decided to put a productive fire under it in the first place.
Yeah, they wouldn't have. They wouldn't have had the same regularity or intensity. I think when you there's a number of people that I see around, and every time I see them, we talk about a little something, but it's kind of like just it's like a keep alive packet, basically. Yeah, and I think you have to create a space in order to kind of create like the full version of something. Like a drawing room is basically an example of that, I think. It's like, kind of, I conceptualize it. So as an old man, I think of that bookshelf dog thingy, but as a not old man, I think my actual, like if I were going to spend money on this and actually, reality as opposed to like some idealized fantasy image or something like that, it would probably be like a workshop.
Yeah.
With like the best monitor that money could possibly buy you, and like extremely well considered acoustics and just everything, and it would be like a control bunker almost, essentially.
And you would just go to Jade's mansion or my mansion to enjoy a drawing room.
Yeah, exactly. I would want to have a thing where like I could have just like music on and like very low lights and like kind of just like a kind of nice, like a really like a smooth pressure is how I would describe it. Those are the best kind of environment for me, I think. And that's like what a coffee shop does on a good day. When there's like cool people, it's not hot, there's like some good music. It's like a kind of very smooth pressure that isn't chaotic and getting in your face all the time, but there's like, it's not the kind of environment that's like, makes you just want to like doze off. Mm-hmm. It's a whole different thing. So I don't know if anyone's been able to create that space privately, then that's pretty cool. Public is one way to do it.
I don't think I've ever told you about my black and gold room. Have I told you about this?
It's just like, no.
My last house before this one, I was living there with my girlfriend of the time. She painted her room black with a gold ceiling and gold trim. And then we broke up and I moved into that room because it's fucking sick. And I lived in a black room with gold, but like it was not a smooth pressure. It was a pressure.
Really?
Like I'd never experienced anything like having my bedroom be
black,
fucking painted black, like pressing on you.
So was it an overall negative thing?
I loved it.
You loved it?
Fucking loved it.
Right.
It was the ultimate of intentionality and centering the intentionality on your center, your bedroom. Like to have like pressure itself, or like the pressure of self-consciousness itself be centered in your most intimate physical spot. And the gold trim with like intimations of like the divinity of self.
Yeah, like, black and gold is a nice combo.
This pressure is like alchemistic. It's like on you, like almost physically.
Yeah.
But it's like for the purpose of self-awareness and self-discovery. And it was so cool that I was like, okay, I have to paint this back to normal now that I'm moving out, obviously. But the black and gold room is definitely a personal archetype now. And when I don't know if I'll make that my bedroom, but like definitely my like work room where I record music and stuff would be highly effective.
You know, music with a black background is a very well suited combination, and it comes up in a lot of places. Most music players are black. Even before dark theme was a huge trend, music players are always black because it's bringing the audio experience into the foreground. And it's basically saying, like, you don't need your eyes right now. This is I think also there's resonance there with just looking at the sky. Like, we're living in a fucking void of blackness. So that's the ultimate self-conscious. This is like a very Carl Sagan type image. The mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Everything that ever happened on Earth up until this point has occurred. All the pain, suffering, dying, joy, triumph. Like it's like this super self-conscious little nexus of like a golden sun, against like a black thing. So there's something very powerful about that. I can see why that image. It's it kind of makes me wonder, like why do you know why your girlfriend painted it black? What was her, like, why did she do that?
Oof, it's a big question.
Oh, really?
Her dad is like vaguely Satanist. Like if you go up to his apartment, there's an upside down cross hanging on the front door, and he like has a very heavy metal appearance and like long pitch black hair and all black clothes and like a heavy metal t-shirt all the time. So it's like partly in our heritage to like fuck with symbolically
Right.
dark things just for the symbolic aesthetic of it. And it was the kind of mood she was in that year, was black and bones and hanging up bones artfully
Right.
in her bedroom. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why she did it. I just know why I liked it
Yeah.
after she left. About the conversations, though, depending on production to push the conversations further.
Sorry, I was just looking at this background.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, go on.
Yeah, it's a thing. I'm not sure the drawing rooms of back in the day got as intense unless they had something to do, unless they had something to make. Like, I'm making up this fantasy in my head right now of the American Constitution, and that was exclusively made, like, in a conspiracy setting, like behind closed doors, in drawing rooms without windows, at least the mood. I'm sure a lot of the drawing rooms had windows because they're not, idiots or, like, eccentrics.
They were pretty eccentric, I'll bet.
Yeah, maybe they were. But they were in drawing rooms, privately working out the fate of the country.
Smoking indoors, no doubt.
And having intense philosophical conversations about what they'd learned from Great Britain and how to build a nation.
Yeah.
And building a nation not for themselves only, but for, like, their progeny.
Yeah.
And for their progeny's progeny. That's, like, the depth of philosophy right there. Like, were there any conversations reaching as deep philosophical depths as those conversations? And was it not their need to produce a constitution that drove those conversations to such new frontiering places?
It's interesting to think about how in history, there have been plenty of philosophical conversations. There have been plenty of podcasts that have occurred in the year 1600, 1700, 1800, up until the present day. But how many of those conversations carried with them the kind of, like, awareness that you weren't just idly figuring out things? Like, it's one thing to sit down and have, like, an academic discussion. There's, like, a little bit of something about the word, like, academic is like, it's like a little bit of a put down, because it's like, look, this isn't really going to, you're not actualizing this, you're just idly saying what if. I don't think there's been many conversations throughout history where there was people having a conversation that touched humanity and, like, kind of covered these, like, earnestly philosophical things in the world that was, like, in the context of we're actually doing something, which must have been pretty crazy. I think you can probably reach a little bit higher. So it's, like, easier to reach more depth when you are not having to kid yourself through it to pretend that it's worth talking about. Because that's the thing, is there's always, like, when you're talking about something you don't plan to do anything with, there's always this nagging assessment of whether or not, like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, the extreme of this is, like, people sitting around having some, like, high-minded conversation and they're both powerless. That's depressing. I think somewhere it's a kind of like there's a spectrum there where the extent to which you're doing something with the ideas makes them extra special.
There's an interesting dance there. I'm thinking of Brett Weinstein's podcast with Heather, his wife, and it's so purpose-driven,
right,
and so serious that it's really hard to listen to.
Dude, I have a hard time listening to it. Yeah.
But like the meaning that's happening there lately is of the utmost fucking relevance and importance.
Right.
He's blowing the whistle on potential dangers of the vaccines, and he's blowing the whistle on the suppression of ivermectin as the most effective, the most cheap pill treatment for both preventing and treating symptoms of COVID, and covering things that are happening in our country without bias. And like it's his driving attitude that's really hard to listen to and very deliberate that is like allowing him to broach these subjects in a thorough manner. But then it's too dry and it's not explorative enough. And so it's hard, it doesn't give much to the audience member, and it doesn't give much to the lover archetype.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to describe that. I was trying to, you just put a label on what I was feeling when I was imagining listening to his podcast. I think you're pretty on point about that. There's a kind of core group of people who want to listen to that kind of thing. I'm glad his podcast exists, because not every podcast needs to appeal to someone who is there for the lover archetype. I don't know. I think beyond the vaccine stuff and the ivermectin stuff, there's kind of, when I look at it, because to be honest, I can't speak to any of those things. I don't know. I don't have really an opinion on that. That's informed by my own experience. I do have an opinion that's formed by my own experience with regard to the other thing that I think is potentially the most significant thing about his podcast, which is kind of like showing how modern censorship works. That's something that's really close to my heart. I don't follow like drug news and stuff like that, but I do follow like tech stuff.
The fact that he's getting censored for saying we have an effective treatment,
and just what that represents in the whole, like in the context of what's happening right now with the intersection of like politics and tech platforms, and kind of the way that freedom of speech is, like the way the dominoes are falling with all these things, and kind of where it's heading. Because I'm really interested in that, very, very, very interested, in order to be able to sort of predict how the communication landscape is going to evolve, and like what are the threats the threats to freedom of speech that are emerging, and kind of what the timeline is on that, because that's something I feel like I can actually do something about personally, is like kind of I think like technology is obviously the problem here, so it's kind of also the solution at the same time. We wouldn't be having this debate if technology hadn't completely altered the way we talk to each other. So clearly the way to fix this is not to try to convince anyone of anything. It's to build different systems. Because one thing I've really realized is like most theories about why people like don't support this or don't support that it's just not a productive way to try to constantly come up with new theories that categorize why some people are doing things that you think are bad. it's just because of like, it's just more, the more interesting question is, why do some ideas spread more than others? Why is the meme, why is like the meme that people being allowed to talk about things that are not approved by the government suddenly perceived as more threatening than they used to be in the past? What has changed about our environment, our world, about how the average person feels? Like, obviously, being utterly terrified for a year has something to do with that, probably. Like, we're jumpy. Our culture has a pervasive sense of anxiety that's metastasized recently into this kind of like, yeah, we're like processing some of that that fear, and I think that that's like kind of like a better way to look at it because to me it signals that it has an endpoint. It signals that to me that it'll continue to evolve and that there really isn't like, we're not doomed as a culture to continually just keep going down this like fear path. Like, we could absolutely, I feel like there's already, this is one of the things I was talking about with those guys at Naked Lounge the other day, was just how like there is a tremendous amount of people in the world, I think, that are just really not buying. They're like not buying the narrative that's being presented, and that's hopeful to me. It's not like a thing that makes me think on its own is going to make things better, but it is the potential to make things better because you're not, you don't have to. You can totally form your own opinion, and sometimes a lot of efforts to, when efforts to form people's opinions overplay their hand, that can sometimes clue you in that, maybe it's just like worth thinking about a little more.
How scared were you personally throughout the year of 2020?
I wasn't scared at all.
At any given point.
I wasn't scared at all.
What about like the first 2 weeks?
I was terrified in the first 2 weeks. Yeah.
In March 2020.
Well, I wouldn't say I was terrified. I was taking it very seriously, and I was thinking like, well, I'll just go live in the woods. Like, that was my plan. I legitimately thought, okay, if there's a deadly pandemic and it's, if there's a significant chance I'll die, I'll go camp out for a year, like, I was fully prepared to do that. But then when I realized that, unless you're old, you don't really have a very rational reason to be terrified. I figured, no, I kind of stopped thinking about it. In fact, I avoided media a lot because I don't want every day to be poisoned by a bunch of doom scrolling. And I feel like I'm not doing anyone any good by just adding to the pile of anxiety in the collective unconscious.
And then, and then what about when the fires hit in California?
That was honestly a bigger deal.
That same year.
That was a bigger deal to me.
Was that frightening?
No, it wasn't frightening. It was it definitely impacted me though. It didn't feel good, even physically. Somehow it was weird how those fires kind of were like, it just really fit with the prevailing. I don't know. There was something important about the way those two things happened at the same time, I think.
Completely. And it's so personally valuable to me that we continued to podcast.
Yeah, me too.
Outside, in the smoke.
Right.
In the peak of Chico getting smoked out.
That's true.
And I want to do that again if it comes to that. I want to get out into it if it gets intense again and lines up with a podcast day. Because now we're actually publishing these things, and no one knows about Smokey the Cop.
The orange background haze would actually be pretty cool effect.
No one knows like the strength of our podcast virility.
Yeah, I'm glad we did that too.
And that's one of our only things we're bringing to this saturated market. It's like
just persistence.
A willing to pod at all costs.
Pod at all costs, man. Yeah, even on like shitty internet connections too.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I'm glad that we did that too because I think that, I could sit here and be like, I wasn't afraid of 2020, but like, how do I know I'm not just kidding myself? Oh, well, so I like to see evidence in my own life of like that I was. Oh well, at least I managed to still accomplish something during that
Me too.
fucking stupid year. You know what I mean? But although I gotta say, in hindsight, the more distance I get from 2020, you know how they say like distance makes the heart grow fonder, or something like that. Or
Do you miss 2020?
Time makes the heart grow fonder. Like, yeah, no, it's not quite to that level yet. I'm sure that like in 30 years there will be aspects of culture that contain a kind of romanticized view of 2020, just like how we romanticize the hell out of like World War II.
Okay, sure.
Whereas at the time,
I don't know how you can romanticize
World War II?
2020.
Oh, 2020.
There's no like glory. There's no like battles.
Well, no, but it hasn't been. See, the events that involve 2020 haven't happened yet. So when they do, it might cast 2020 in a new light, because you'll see like, oh, that like 2020 was the year that no one knew about it yet, but that this started because of this, you know. So
yeah.
you can kind of, maybe in the future we'll be able to see how it fits into the bigger picture, kind of like how World War II at the time, no one knew that World War II was going to cause a baby boom, which would cause a cultural revolution, you know, in the 60s. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of that, you know, you have to let things play out, I think, before you understand the relevance. Because I bet in like 1950, I bet people looked at World War II and go like, that sucked, let's not think about that anymore, let's have a barbecue. Like, honey, you know, invite them over, you know. And that's where you get like that idyllic, like insistently, everything is okay kind of culture.
Well, there was an exultance too. There was, we're going to bring capitalism to the world now. We're going to bring democracy to the world now.
We're the winners.
Because democracy won. Right. It triumphed over tyranny.
Yeah.
It triumphed over evil itself.
Yeah.
What tyrant can't we topple?
Exactly.
Oh, something's happening in Korea. I'm totally for us going in there and just wiping them out.
We're going to topple the tyrant of having to wash dishes. Buy this dishwasher! And so, like, even, like, mundane aspects of life became, like, just, like, conquered with the technological, democratic prowess of the American machine. You know what I mean? And, like, here's the thing.
I mean, for real.
I love the dishwashers, okay? I don't have a dishwasher.
That's what happened.
But I like this. I mean, I'm not complaining about, like, dishwashers are great. I don't want some human to have to do this shit. I'm not romanticizing dishwashing yet. Although I'm sure I will at some point. Was I frightened? I was aware for that first 2 weeks. I was wary and aware, and that day, like the day or two, I was like, okay, where's my food coming from, and where's my toilet paper coming from? Oh my God, you were one of those people.
Who didn't have extra rolls at home? Yeah,
bro. I just got some from my mom. Okay, she had like six rolls of it.
I worked in SF, so SF was one of the first cities to get the emergency shipments of toilet paper.
Ground zero.
So I just picked up a 30 rack of rolls while I was working.
That's amazing.
And then I was good. But that year in general, I did take the opportunity, as most people did, to go more inward and to only see my closest circle of people and let all the other friendships and all the other acquaintances wait and see if they survived, but like let them die off and just focus on Ade, just focus on you, just focus on like 3 or 4 other people, and focus most centrally on myself. And I always use the metaphor that a surprisingly few amount of people are aware of. Like, I thought more people had watched Neon Genesis Evangelion, the anime, but the season finale of it is 2020 to a T, and I carried out the Neon Genesis Evangelion moment of radical self-awareness where everything falls away except you, and there's only you and the choice to exist or not exist. Like, if there's nothing else in the world, are you still saying yes to what the next moment might bring?
Going back to the whole black room thing, do you think that has anything to do with Satanism, like as a kind of focus on yourself, kind of awareness. I mean, I'm talking like Satanism in the way that it's conceptualized, I suppose, by like Western people, like LaVey, and like do without will, for that is the whole of the law style Satanism.
Yeah, you can't get away from associations of Satanism if you are attempting to see yourself as the highest ideal. That's literally what Orthodoxy says Satan is.
I think it almost goes back to like it connects to like the idea of like Eden, and something like where like the self-conscious man claims the knowledge of good and evil and gets cast out of paradise, and he takes the devil's deal, basically. It's very satanic. The idea of like even like making iron is a very satanic impulse.
And the satanic story is the story of the ego emerging from the unconscious ape.
Yes.
The ego is previously blissfully ensconced in an unconscious experience of pure instinct and pure oneness with nature, and then experience itself as ego, as distinct, as not nature, but itself, looking at nature. And there's an aggressive, rebellious, maybe, escape velocity to make that psychic acceleration and then that new psychic development possible in a species that doesn't have ego awareness yet. And so you're gonna get a traumatic emotional response to that, of like separation from the mother and separation from existence, while you get used to the new experience that is at first very shocking, but then is needing to be followed through to create new integration of a new tool back into the natural fabric.
Yeah, that's funny how you just assume that is like your purpose, is to integrate what you find back into the natural fabric.
I don't assume that at all. I've decided it.
I mean, I'm of the same view as you, in that I think that somehow the fact that you don't ever really escape from the natural fabric, you still are the natural fabric. It's the natural fabric in a different form. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you can't help being connected to the natural fabric. Whatever you become it immediately affects the nature of the natural fabric. It's just whether you admit that or not, whether you observe that to be true. I certainly do. Mm-hmm. Fucking dogs, man. Carlos Castaneda had this quote that I was reading. It was like, the warrior perceives everything to be a challenge, where the ordinary man considers it a blessing or a curse. Considers everything to be a blessing or a curse. And sure. I think it has something to do with that. Like, if you're sitting and you're just kind of like sitting in a state of equilibrium with the world like an animal, good things happen to you or bad things happen to you. And then that's that. There's not really a kind of self-conscious yes or no ethos, like claim to power, that is present in people either, unless you go with that. And I don't know if it's always a good idea for everyone to go with that. Sometimes you have to just sit and let things happen to you, especially if you're healing from things.
Of course, that's a natural part of the flow, but aggressive affirmation of your own agency is also a natural part of the human psyche. Yeah. And it does not do to deny that part of humanity, the part of a human that makes a difference, that rocks the boat, that disrupts.
Disrupt the motherfucking taxi industry. Yeah, that's true. Actually, this impulse to disrupt things has just been scaled up by computers. It's been scaled up by all technology. It's been scaled up by swords and by fire and by language and by steampunk shit, and you know we've dug canals connecting oceans to each other because that would be good if that was that way. It's like kind of almost taken to kind of an extreme when you consider how people can create like super personal organizations that are directed toward a specific purpose. I think that's what the dark side of Satanism is, which is like weird because you're like, Satanism isn't that the dark? No, Satanism is neutral. Satanism is technology, okay? There's a dark side to it that I think it's not the fact that you are making a choice or that you are trying to claim power over the world. It's that the means you use to do it might end up turning against you and having power themselves, and then they're blind, and they're just like blind, dangerous machines that kill people, whether or not. And because you like the story, the dark side of Satanism is losing control, I think, and not having the wisdom of God or the wisdom of the natural fabric that knows how to handle power. That's like the sort of impetuous child with like basically a gun. That's what humans as a species are, and we're fucking bold, and it's kind of inspiring in that sense because we're having this conversation. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's like an interesting way to look at it.
I think the dark side of Satanism is like you use your maybe Satanist impulse of aggression itself, of saying no to something in the process of saying yes to something you uniquely have to bring to bear on the world. So you say no to everything that's gone before because you're deciding to make something new. If that becomes the dark side of Satanism, when that process comes against reality and like you refuse to accept your ensconcement in reality. You refuse to accept that you are part of nature. And you refuse to admit the effects your actions are having. You refuse to reckon with them.
So like delusion or self-deception.
Conscious self-deception. Conscious delusionment. That's the dark side of Satanism. Because the impetuous bull in a china shop thing, that's just growing. That's just learning. That's just exploring.
Yeah, well, sometimes kids like fucking walk off a cliff, so they hurt themselves, Part of growing is fucking up, injuring yourself.
And finding out that you've caused damage.
Yeah.
But it doesn't become sin until you see that it's wrong, see what it's doing that's bad, and then choose to persist in that action regardless.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, take something like World War II. Like, that viewed from the outside, viewed on a multi-decade, like in the timescale of the whole 20th century, is absolutely an aspect of humans outgrowing their industrialism. Like, World War II was like the ultimate. It was like the final accumulation of the disruption caused by industrialism.
Don't you mean industrialism outgrowing the human? Getting out of our hands?
Yeah, that's what happened. Is the industrial machine that humans created? There was like a reckoning between like the master and the tool it created, and that kind of having to contend with the fact that we figured out how to make machine guns and never used them in a war before, so we have to do that to know what it's like now, and then not do it anymore. That directly played into the next stage, which is, okay, humans built nuclear bombs now. Well, we haven't used those yet. Well, there was once. That was the end of World War II, so it was like this perfect little segue into the atomic age, like, oh, that was a thing now. Okay, so what next? So we're still in that growth process, I think, but on an instantaneous level, the way it affects, you as an individual are not trapped by having to have this whole cycle of history lived out. That's the collective unconscious evolving. the personal conscious, I think, the personal consciousness of people can leap far, far ahead of where humans at large have reached in their stage of development.
Okay.
Because it's I guess it's like whether that's like what the hero's bringing back. Maybe is like if you get into the future and you bring back a little piece of the future and try to integrate it to the present. That's like a sociological way of, I guess, looking at what you said before, which is like integrating something into the natural fabric. Yeah.
I was thinking next with the like aggressive ego impulse, but then the injunction to like recognize reality or God, or like make it of service to the fabric, like make your new disruption harmonious with things, like of benefit to you, of benefit to those around you, of benefit to the people that come after you. Like the responsibility to do that, and the learning and breaking that happens while you're like developing still. It reminds me of the white man colonizing the Americas, and most of the damage was completely accidental.
Smallpox and shit like that, yeah.
It was just accident and discovery. Just the action, it was quantum physics where perceiving an electron shunts the electron.
Yeah.
Perceiving the red man destroyed the red man.
Right.
Before we even knew what was happening, they were almost all dead.
They did a pretty good job mopping up the survivors too.
Well, that's where it became sin.
Right.
Is within that world that sprang into being in tragedy and discovery. Within that era, there were people who then worked to make things worse, and there were people who worked to make things better.
Yeah, I wonder.
But there was a basic neutral thing that involves zero value judgments of the moral standing of the white man versus the moral standing of the red man. There was an innocent collision of human populations first.
I think what happens is that you have something that happens that's a neutral event that is related to the fact that human populations expand and touch other ones, and then they give them deadly diseases for which their immune systems are not capable of. They can't handle them because they've never been exposed to them. And so you have this collision of worlds, and you have 90% of the population die. I wonder if on some unconscious level, that tragedy, that pain of having done that, even though it was accidental, is like something that makes people more willing to justify like what you called sin, which is like just conscious embrace of what just happened. Like, oh, we killed 90% of them. Well, it's too hard for us to take a perspective that would paint us as the originators of this destructive event, and so we're going to create a kind of rationalization that goes, well, this is supposed to happen anyway, this was fine, so let's double down on this and kill all the rest. I think that is what humans do, is that rather than...
Is that what you do?
Sometimes I'll rationalize things that happen to me anyway as being the best thing, as a way of just... because I can't change it. Like, for instance, like, if I...
But we're talking about definitely changing it in the form of making it worse.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that, like... I mean, I don't know. If I've ever done that, I don't know. I haven't really... There's nothing I've really realized that I've done that about, but I don't know. I haven't really looked at this in a personal lens before. I think on a historical level, though, that's what's always happening, is that culture is, like, constantly apologizing for what happened. Like apologizing in the kind of like in the sense of like apologetics. Like Christian apologetics is like a way of explaining, rationalizing, and framing questions so that their answers align with a preconceived idea that this is true. And so there's a kind of cultural apologetics that happens. Like we go, oh, well, the internet disrupted a bunch of stuff. So that was good. There was also some bad effects, but it's better to, depending on where your incentives are aligned as someone who's either benefiting from it or not, you look at it a different way. And the truth is, it's neither. It's neutral. It's just a process of change. And that embedded within it, whether or not you're benefiting or being harmed by it, it doesn't really have any bearing on your personal reaction to it, of what you choose to do and whether your intentions are good or not. It's kind of like, I don't know, sometimes you walk down the sidewalk and you fucking stub your toe. Were you being punished? No. You know, like that kind of thing. If you look at like history as a process of just dangerous shit flying around, sometimes hitting people, that's what is going on. So it doesn't, that's the narratives that attempt to ascribe agency of good groups and bad groups, and like the whole, I mean, it goes back even to the ancient times where you think you're being punished because of like something that you did, and now like a plague strikes your community or something like that. I don't know. To me, that's just like a reflection of what people expect they deserve, or something like that. How much post-processing do you do on the audio usually? Do you do like noise removal or anything on it?
I turn the volume up.
Gotcha.
That's it.
So yeah, kind of.
I have to get into audio processing like in emergency measures. Like when we did the Creek episode.
Oh, the Creek one, yeah, right.
I had our mics resting by the external laptop battery, and so the mics picked up the whirring fan really loud while we were breaking, which the cell phone didn't pick up. So the whole auto synchronize function couldn't work, and all the microphone audio was lost.
That sucks.
So I had to use iPhone audio, which held Creek white noise as 60% of the mix. So I had to like find tools of white noise reduction.
Gotcha. That like algorithmically identifies like a babbling brook and removes it
and gives it a bar for you to adjust.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah, how much of the Creek do you want?
That's awesome. That's awesome.
It's amazing.
Like, I mean, it's what your brain is doing when you listen to music and you perceive the different instruments. Mm-hmm. You're doing like a signal decomposition with your neural network.
And that's perception itself.
Yeah. Constantly
filtering out 99% of perception for purposes of whatever the focus of your moment is.
Deconstructing all the input that is your life and re-expressing it in terms of symbolic, important bits that you should do something about. Yeah.
So you had a prompt in regards to the 4 archetypes of king / the center, and warrior, and magician, and lover.
Yeah.
As 4 intermixing aspects of a human. And you asked if there's any crucial difference between the king / center archetype and the queen / center archetype.
Yes. I remember last pod, somehow, I don't remember how it came up, but we got into this king, warrior, magician, lover thing. And I thought it was interesting that quadrant system, I just wondered, like, is there really, because we talked a bit about the king archetype, that it includes and it encapsulates those other 3. So I was just thinking, like, what if you extended that? Is the queen archetype a different thing? So that's kind of the question, is like, is it, and I think if it is different, when you break it down, you might find different components. Like, I think if you say, well, if there's a warrior, a female magician, and a female lover, if those all 3 combine together to make a queen, and then the original 3 make a king, I think in that case there's really not a difference, because all you're doing is just adding a female label to, so you're not really gaining any information there. So in that case, I think that the king archetype is kind of like not really specific to masculine energy. But I just was thinking about it. I'm not really sure. Maybe there is something structurally different about the queen archetype? And if there is, I guess the meta question that I kind of had about that question was, is society willing to admit that kind of distinction in the case of like these idealized forms? Because like the king and the queen, you're not really putting anyone down. So does the act of drawing a difference between masculine and feminine archetypes itself, does that offend sensibilities of anyone who is concerned about like the political equality of genders, or the fact that people emphasize them so much or something like that?
It definitely offends people, and people definitely reject any binary for the sake of the small slice of people who don't feel themselves to fit into that binary in a neat way that
Right.
culture tells them they're supposed to fit.
Right.
With the king and the queen, I think the differences are mostly on different aspects of the psyche are stressed. Mostly it's shared traits. The king and the queen share traits of royalty. They share traits of personal sovereignty, personal agency, free will to choose and choose what the world does around them. The queen emphasizes the life-giving, the fountain of life, new life that's coming out of this person. The king partakes of that too. It's just the stress isn't on that with the king.
Right.
The stress is with the king is more on imposing order on a chaotic wilderness.
Yeah.
But that's what an effective queen does too.
Well, being a fountain is itself a source of order. It's kind of the question of whether is order coming from the center or is it coming from outside? Maybe that's the stress. Maybe that's the distinction.
I was thinking about it in terms of Medulla, because I think something like Medulla by Bjork could only have been created by a woman. It could not have been created or even imagined by a man. It could not have been created by a transsexual person who didn't fully feel or want to label themselves as a man.
The making of Medulla, there's a little quote that's relevant. It says, Bjork, the inner or deep part of an animal or plant structure. That's what medulla means. Yeah. And I think that was an important piece of context for me. And what you're saying makes a lot of sense because, of course, you're gonna. Bjork is the person who would make that. It is hard to imagine that being created by a man.
I would argue literally impossible for a man to make that.
To bring something out of their bone marrow like that, sinew and
if they
skin and voice, and it kind of just like
that's just like only a woman gets to explore those parts of outer space,
inner space,
and there's places of existence that only a man can get to by virtue of the mountains of testosterone pouring
I know,
through
right
them.
And a lot of comedy is about that shit actually. a lot of classic stand-up routines are basically just saying that. Right.
So I'd say yes, there are crucial differences in the queen archetype versus the king archetype, and the person that represents a frog-like mix match of both of them. The proper affirmation of that person's experience and complete fulfillment of their unique drive and their unique direction can only they're the only people who can pick those fruits. A man could never get there. A woman could never get there.
Why do you say frog-like?
Because frogs are asexual and bisexual and transsexual.
And just like all metamorph, like amphibian, just doing that kind of it's
they
true.
Like change at need which sex they're gonna be to meet the needs of their progeny in the next month.
That's why they're hella affected by chemicals, because they're constantly soaking in things from the environment, taking it into themselves, becoming tadpoles. I mean, if you were like a being that like became like a little squiggly thing, started off as like a little tadpole, and then like you completely changed your form anatomically.
Isn't that what you did?
But I don't remember it.
Isn't that what I did?
I was a little tadpole, but I'm saying like I wasn't running around living my life as a little squiggly thing.
Right, you weren't a whole...
I don't have memories of that. I'm just saying if you'd gone through that level of transformation.
Self-consciously.
Self-consciously. Probably wouldn't have too many hang-ups about changing your gender.
Yeah.
Be like, bro, I used to have a fucking tail and no arms and legs. And I'm pretty sure some other things like, I don't know. And then now I'm like a hoppy thing. I used to be a swimmy thing, now I'm a hoppy thing. Yeah, it's like, okay. The gender thing seems like a quibble at that point. Yes, well, I mean, frogs, like, what is it even? It's not like what would you call that? Like, it's not transsexual, it's like transmorphic.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's a cool name.
It's a nice word.
It's a nice word, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I was bringing up these issues of gender initially in our prompts both from the point of view of a transsexual experience that I've internalized most of my life, and from the point of view of seeing Zoomers. Probably you see it way more here in California than in other less liberal parts of the country, where a healthy portion of the men are not wanting to be men. They are not wanting to say that I have a dick, I have testosterone, I look like a man, my bone structure is growing like a man, so I'm a man.
Like
they do not make that conclusion.
They don't feel like culture offers them a stereotype that they feel comfortable adopting for themselves, for their identity.
They will not say they have one of the binary things.
Right.
They want to be called they.
Yeah.
They want to be called non-binary.
Right.
Or they want to think of themselves as non-binary. And from the point of view of going through that entire journey myself, I think people are not making the discernment that they have an anti-man bias that they've inherited from liberal culture and think that it's evil and Satanist to be a man.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting the Satanist part, and I know
that's exactly what it fucking is.
But clearly, it's not. It's very Satanist though. If it's Satanism from the way we were talking about Satanism.
I'm bringing it up as like people don't know what they're missing. Like you have a chance to be a man, like fucking go for it. There are things a man can do with a cock and all that testosterone and free will like that no one else can do. There are inventions to be made. There are buildings to be built. There's shit that no one, like, any woman has no fucks to give for any of that stuff. Like, they don't have the chemicals for it.
I don't know about that, man. I feel like, it's like we have to break down exactly, what are people really rejecting? I think on some level, what people are rejecting is just like boredom, or like sometimes when you feel like you have no space, you go in a 90 degrees direction, and you go, well, the thing about life in 2021 is that a lot of the ways that people can be themselves are fucking boxed in by a kind of conformist media culture that wants to fucking squash people. And despite its claims to the contrary, the social media universe that people live in is not promoting expression. It's promoting conformity, fear, and it's promoting a lack of expression, really.
See, I don't agree with your assessment that people are seeing the lack of space granted them by culture and choosing a rebellious 90-degree turn to be non-binary, for example. I think that's a super conformist thing to do.
It's not very. It's definitely not very rebellious. It's just.
It's completely applauded by everyone around
Right.
you. It's completely applauded by the
Yeah.
media culture.
I guess I only mean that it's new. It's just new in terms of the mode of expression that or like the extent to which it's expressed in culture currently is very new. And as a millennial, it's even new to me. Because, I mean, yeah, of course, there's always been trans people and there's always been non-binary people. Even before non-binary was a word, there was always been non-binary people. But, yeah, I think it's just, definitely the way it's been articulated by culture in the last 10, really 5 years has been something that hasn't happened before. And nobody wants to, we're just coming off of the whole, like, gay is okay cultural thing, so nobody wants to be the guy who's like mad at people for making a personal choice. I personally don't want to be that person. I don't fucking care if people are non-binary. I wouldn't want like people to think that I really give a fuck what they do. You know what I'm saying? I think it goes both ways though. At the same time, like I don't think it's good to like go around and make people pay attention to something that maybe they don't want to or they don't care about.
Right.
Because if only because I don't really, like, you don't know what to say. Like, you wouldn't go up to someone and be like, hey, can I talk to you about Jesus? Like, have you heard it? Like, I'm a Jehovah, like, our Lord and Savior.
And that's totally what it amounts to.
Well, you sit to something,
YouTube, like, it doesn't matter who you are, YouTube is going to come up to you and say, have you heard about LGBTQ philosophies?
No, and here's the thing.
If let me tell you what you need to think.
And there's a difference.
About all of them.
And I'm not even saying most people do that. It's a very unrepresentative sample, just like most Christians or most Jews or whatever. Like, I've been in the airport. I've seen the Orthodox Jew people. They have like a top, big, black hat, and they have little curly Q things on the sides of their head, and they're just walking around. They're just standing there. That doesn't bother me. I don't care.
Yeah, they're very chill.
Exactly. It's like that's completely inoffensive. It doesn't, like, I don't think anyone who's offended at the mere presence, I mean, even if you were dressed up as a clown, in 2020, like, in this day and age, in 2021, you could be literally, like, Lady Gaga in the meat dress, and you could be standing in, like, at the grocery store. Well, maybe that's a bad example. Maybe not the meat department. You could be standing in a very public location, and maybe some people will look at you, but no one's going to say shit. People's going to be like, no, this person is on, like, that is completely socially unacceptable to give people shit for what they look like, as it should be. I'm glad that I don't live in a culture where people can have to worry about what they wear, you know what I mean? But also, I think there's a minority of people who feel insecure and still feel that people are going to judge them, and so, like, going around and rallying people under the banner of tolerance is a very ironic way to express tolerance. A very unintentionally ironic way. It's like, I think tolerance extends also to mental space. Like, maybe not everyone in the world has to focus on the same problems. Everyone should find a niche where they can work on justice, social or otherwise. There are other forms of justice besides, there's environmental justice, there's intellectual justice, there's there's technological justice now. Like, the way that, like, the internet works is a technological justice issue that is, like, has direct bearing on a tremendous amount of other issues. So, it's like the point at which you're approaching the problem, if you feel as a person like you're one of those people who needs to do something about the world. Not everyone feels that way. I do, to an extent, but I think just the way I was raised, my upbringing, the set of things that I have at the ready to feel like I'm a good person, it's easier for me to express those in ways that I comprehend. Now, if I grew up and I had, like, one of my siblings or something was trans, well, then of course I'd probably be a lot more interested in that.
Right. Right. But it's not like a part of your skill set. It's not natively a part of your understanding.
Right.
So it's not necessarily beneficial for you to get into that game.
It's not beneficial for me to pretend like I know a lot about that. The only thing I ask is that people respect that fact without assuming that I'm a hateful asshole. I'm really interested to hear people's perspective, but not from the position of like you're bad, let me improve you. Like
Right.
That's just condescending bullshit.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond like it's not social justice. People who do that are not the only people who do that. There's people who do that about everything.
Yes.
And social justice people are no exception. It's just human shit, really. It's not a particular issue, I don't think, to that strain of thought.
My concluding point on the gender thing in general is, I think a lot of these choices by Zoomers are being made with a subconscious hatred of the masculine and not wanting to admit that there's a part of them that causes damage, too. There's a part of them that causes destruction too. And they get to self-select out of that whole karmic cycle by saying, no, I'm not a man. And I think you're missing out if you have a chance to be a man and you make that choice without like really stopping and thinking about what's uniquely available to you as a man. And all the people in the world, what could you do with this opportunity?
Well, what's your personal experience with that? Because I feel like that really informs your view on this.
It's a totally personal conclusion I've come to.
Right.
From a point of view of being raised by my mom and my sister, and my dad was basically absent in my upbringing for all intensive purposes, and I inherited a lot of this unconscious man hate from my sister and my mom, and ideas of what it meant to be good, what it meant to be beautiful, were all female ideas. And what it meant to be helpful in the world were like ideas of what it means to be a helpful woman in the world.
Right.
And so I absorbed an assumption that men were basically inferior to women while also being physically a man. So some real cognitive dissonance there. And a moment of clarity happened in 2020 where I realized in my conscious mind self, like in the silence of my own awareness, I did and have my whole life felt much more like a girl than a man. Have always felt a detachment and at best a curiosity of looking at something completely unfamiliar when I have contemplated my own physical body and my maleness specifically. Like I remember some of my first memories developmentally are looking at myself in the mirror and like having no fucking idea who that was.
Wow.
That I was looking at.
That was like when you were a little kid?
Yes.
Even before you had puberty or anything like that? You were just
complete
wow.
unfamiliarity with what is going on there. What is that?
And at the time, I'm sure you didn't know what that meant or what that felt like. Or I mean, not what was the significance of that?
Yeah, it only gained significance over time when allowed to grow with these negative connotations of maleness and the physical fact of becoming more and more and more a man and just putting sticks in the spokes of my wheels, the more I didn't want to admit to the responsibilities that come with being a man.
So this is a transcendence of the matriarchal island universe from whence you came.
And an awareness and an acceptance that I'd felt myself more basically to be a woman this entire time. And seeing that more clearly in my head it allowed me to proceed from there.
Right.
Be like, okay, well, if my choice is life and not self-destruction, then if my choice is complete affirmation of reality affirmation of existence and this embrace of what is, then now that I know this about myself, what attitude am I going to take towards my maleness?
Right.
So that
am I going to suppress it or embrace it, basically? Right.
So how am I, as this newly understanding him, herself being, how am I going to interact with my maleness so that he can thrive?
Okay, so I think I understand why you have a countercultural perspective on this now, because there is a trend in culture that goes, oh, you have some masculinity within you. It'd be pretty easy to shit on that. It would be pretty easy to be like, to look at all the negatives and go like, well, that's my only option of what I can do with this.
Yes.
To integrate this masculine and feminine energy that I have within me. Man, that's a really I feel like having that personal perspective on it is really illuminating, the way you've explained it to me. That's I wonder why. Well, it's pretty clear why cultural consensus takes aim at masculinity as the thing that should probably be suppressed in any kind of gender conflict, is because it's like a backlash against the patriarchy thing. So it's a political issue.
I think it's like a seesaw. Like the last thing we spent decades doing as Western Civ was suppressing the female side of things.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's the same thing happening now for the same reasons, just in the other direction. Like, whatever you're alienating like that, your own unconscious that you have yet to face in yourself is projected over there, and you're just reacting to your own shadowy fears by trying, like, the white Western man suppressing the woman, not letting her vote, not letting her, like, make buildings or like admit that she's the actual architect behind a building.
And then the white Western woman said, all right, you assholes, I'm going to take away your booze. And she did.
She did.
And then the man got the booze back after a while when they learned their lesson. And then we have organized crime, but that's a different story. See, these are the dangers of not integrating. These are the dangers of riding this stupid seesaw of alienation. I don't want to ride this seesaw.
I'm saying that the psyche did that because of fear of the power of the female, and it was their own unconscious power of their own feminine abilities that they were afraid of too, and also like fear of nature itself, fear of existence itself, and like believing so powerfully in the power archetypally of the female.
Well, we name hurricanes after females. So.
That it's like they get scared of it, and so they need to suppress it. And so now it's the same thing happening in reverse. Like all the human traits of like making mistakes, bull in a china shop, making real forceful decisions that change things and come with good and bad, that then you have to learn from that too. And like the unconsciousness of our historic past, like what our ancestors have done and the damage that's been made by this forward thrust of civilization itself. Like now we're doing the opposite thing, where we're so afraid of the masculine energy to affect things that we don't want to see it in ourselves. We want to suppress it in culture. Like,
well, the masculine
keep that man power down. It's too powerful.
But secretly, what we're really afraid of is retribution by the divine feminine. It's like I think climate change is like a wrathful goddess going to come fuck you up. Like it's like the chthonic, unmitigated aspect of nature emerging to do something that you've never seen. That's very invasive feeling. It's growth. It's like this kind of taking over. It's like grass, or it's like things coming up from the ground to envelop you, and like it's this kind of, that's a very if there was like a divine goddess that was going to fuck up Earth, it would happen with nature. It would be just like, because like cities, sea walls, like roads, like nations. These are all like very masculine constructions that are attempting to impose order on something that's fundamentally
ungovernable,
ungovernable and eternal, and self-generative, and that's so. Yeah, I we're having this political anxiety about masculinity, but I think it belies something much deeper, which is our fear of the unknown as we're being pushed closer and closer to like the edge of the dark forest where we see some eyes peering out there. So it's kind of this something very feminine about that to me, about facing darkness or going into darkness.
Yes.
Yeah,
for sure.
it's like that dark room thing. Like, I mean, if that's a pretty good symbol of our time, is this like walking into a dark room feeling.
We're talking about like a dark room, like haunted house, or like the black walls, painted black walls type?
Both, I suppose. I mean, maybe the black walls thing was just a coincidence that we were talking about that. Maybe not. But the idea of walking into a dark room is like, that's what the future for a lot of people is. That's the media constructed image of the future, at least anyway, is walking into a dark room. Unknown, a bunch of vague threats where no one can quite agree on how bad they are. And there's a bunch of like fighting about people, like there's a bunch of identifying with, each person is obliged to identify a little bit with how bad they think things are going to be. And so you get into conversations like, I think, humans will really have to adapt for climate change. And then some people are going to be like, no, you're underestimating it. We're going to be fucked. There's not going to be archaeologists in 500 years to, well, okay, so the Earth got hit by an asteroid before, and it totally survived. Like, life will survive. Humans will survive.
Wow.
Civilization
That's
might.
True.
Civilization might not. Cities might not. The water table might not. Or who knows? Maybe it will. I mean, there's just, the point is all of these takes that people have about what the future is says more about the thoughts that come into your mind when you're standing in a dark room than anything else.
I agree.
And it doesn't mean they're wrong. It's just that it's important to recognize like that's where we're at. I think it's like kind of like a hope for the best kind of situation. Obviously, you can't rule out that really, truly, you and I will live to see Mad Max in our lifetime, or maybe we'll live to see Star Trek. But the fact that we don't really know, and either one of those are entirely plausible, scientifically valid scenarios, is mind-blowing, and has never really been something that human culture has to honestly, earnestly contend with in its political discourse.
Yeah.
So, and as we've seen, we don't actually contend with it. We make up stories and identify with them. No one's really trying to figure out their probability of this because it's too politicized. The only thing you can do is like, well, try to make solar panels or something. Which has I think in the best case scenario would be that humans eventually the lights come on and it's not as bad as we thought. We're like, oh well, actually that panic about the environment, it was a good thing because now we have technology to like make fucking fusion. Like, that'd be cool. As soon as humans unlock the ability to extract energy by like merging hydrogen nuclei, it's game over. That's the point at which humans are completely unstoppable because we're just the sun in a biological form. We're doing the same energy conversion process. It maybe took 4 billion years for the sun to bootstrap its ability to do a little more than just radiate blindly. But then once humans become like the incarnation of the solar process, then I would say that's like a kind of finish line a little bit to climate change.
Of one era.
Of one era, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the beginning of a new era. It's the beginning of something new.
That opens up everything else.
We're just in
after.
Mythologically, we're like, that's why people say we're like in the Kali Yuga, which is like the Hindu conception of like the end of time when things come to a head and are run down and there's destruction and transformation and stuff like that's, like even non-Western cultures I think have perceived and projected this idea of becoming that we're going through. Amazing how that relates to gender. It's because it's happening in your own life too,
I remember my heroic dose of mushrooms, which I've only done one of that high dose of psilocybin so far. But for a while, I became this like embodiment of the distorted tyrant king, Trump asshole. Like I embodied that and was that. And it was like the bad trip part of the experience.
How did that feel?
I was waiting to get stamped out. It was like the emotional experience of finding out you're the asshole and you're the one everyone's waiting. Like how I was just acting out the answer to the question of how might it feel to be Trump?
Yeah.
I was asking that question. And
I've thought about that before.
And with what I know and
right.
about the experience a big plethora of the American population is having, like that would feel like finding out you're the biggest asshole in the room and you need to shape up really fucking quick because you're making so much noise. But I also knew like this is my own shame about being a man. And this is a distortion of what it means to be a man. This is the undeveloped, immature thing.
It's the baby it's the toddler in the movie theater version of being a man is what it is.
It is.
Yeah, it's a crying kind of like
And so I had to ask myself, like, so is there still a part of you that does not want to admit that you have masculine traits that are native to you? And that you're making these false associations about what it means to be a man, because that's total illusion. Like, you listen to people.
Yeah.
You are a compassionate person.
Yeah.
When every time you've found out about the negative results of things you were unconsciously doing, you shaped up immediately. And then felt way too much shame about it afterwards. So that in its way, that trip did start the line of questioning that crystallized in me understanding myself as a much more transsexual identity than I had been aware of before.
But that kind of gives you a perspective that a lot of people who have always felt like a man don't have, maybe, because you've consciously approached.
They've never questioned it.
Yeah.
They've never had distance from it by trauma or by curiosity.
Yeah. Like a fish in water, basically. Kind of just unconsciousness.
And it's questions necessary to the career path of being a front man. That's a shaman role. It's the front man at a show.
So you have to be really in touch with your own energy.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to be very feminine. You have to be very masculine. You have to have both of them working.
Integrated.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm thinking about like Aerosmith or something there.
Or David Bowie.
David Bowie. Yeah. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. I know. It's really there, isn't it? Rock and roll is really transsexual, actually.
Yes, it is.
It certainly is. Funny how, I never quite put that together, but that is...
And here I am.
It's odd. I wonder why do people not question that more? Because it's a super bold, aggressive thing. Why do people not question that more? That's an unexpected thing. That's a complex detail of culture is why is it just like being having to present yourself to people like that or something, like bears your soul or something that makes you can't hide from it anymore or something? Is that what it is?
That's very feminine, to bare your insides in a performance.
I mean, like bare your soul of being the focus of attention, just in the sense where like if that spotlight is shined upon you, it illuminates a masculine aspect if you think you're a woman, or vice versa. If you think you're a man, illuminates a feminine aspect, and where you almost like need to integrate that now, because before, like, you just you never turn the lights on.
Sure.
But something about being on a stage turns the lights on. I can only imagine.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I loosely think also that at least with male frontmen in modern rock music from the 60s onward, it's like we've always associated the arts themselves and the performing arts with the feminine. The same very loose
Really?
categorization of like dogs are dudes, cats are women, like engineering and building is dudes, and the arts and poetry and music, and those are the chicks.
Fucking Sylvia Plath.
So
Kill
like
herself, yeah.
so any
Right.
man who's choosing to make music for a living, who's choosing to sing for a living, like be the diva, that's culturally a feminine thing. Like, why aren't you fucking like doing something manly with your life? You want to stand on a stage and sing like a pansy?
Right. So you're Joan of Arc. That's what you're saying.
No.
Okay.
That's cool.
She was pretty great. Or he or they. Joan of Arc was a they.
You wouldn't just call her a she?
I don't know. The way my understanding is that there's questions about whether Joan of Arc was a man or a woman. No one really knows.
I mean, I always think of Joan of Arc as a woman.
Me too.
And that's the power of the story.
Well, her image and her persona and the meaning of her character in history
is fully
is
her
very
as
feminine.
a female.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's like her. She was a leader of men though too, so she like successfully cast herself in the role of a very masculine thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, I guess, if you look at it like, how much depth you want to dig into her character. I don't know that honestly that would be a cool topic for a pod. Honestly,
That's so amazing.
Yeah, it is.
To just the phrase that she led men.
Yeah.
And in those times, it's the most. I mean.
Right.
Her name is famous for a very good reason.
Right. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Dope.
Do you have anything else?
No, man. Let's call it.
Okay.